Welcome to the July 17th, 2024 Finance Subcommittee of the Brookline School Committee. We will start with our first agenda item, which is approval of minutes of the June 26, 2024 Finance Subcommittee meeting. I will make the motion. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Sarah, any discussion? There is one discussion that I want to make, which is on the part where we talked about what was going to happen next on the class guidelines. Carolyn mentioned, and I think she's right, that the wording was a little bit prescriptive as to the next steps. We had only talked about it going to policy, and the wording in the minutes is a little bit more specific about like advancement adoption. I can't remember the exact words, but it's a little more specific. So we're going to just leave it at it's going to policy next and not sort of write the whole sentence out. So that would be the one minor edit we would have to the minutes. So with that, Val, how do you vote?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
And I vote yes, and we don't have Carolyn in the attendees. Okay, so you're just waiting. I guess we don't, oh, there's Carolyn. I don't think we need to wait on Carolyn though to make that change, but I'll give her 1 sec. Carolyn, hi.
Hi, so sorry to be late.
That's okay. We just voted on the minutes with the edit.
Okay.
Do you want to vote too, or do you want to skip?
Yes.
Okay.
My vote is yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Yep. Then next item on the agenda is acceptance of gifts. We do not have any gifts to accept. The next item is acceptance of grants. And the one grant that we have to review is the Innovation Fund Award for FY25. So in the packet, you all received, and let me try and figure out how to.
I can pull it up, Mariah.
Thank you. So you received both the letter from the Innovation Fund, which has a breakdown of the costs, and the total is the $227,000 and 882. I'm sorry, $227,882. And then there were some additional, the non-salary costs of the 42,000. So it's about 330,000 total, I believe. And there was also an additional document that the high school and OTL staff provided us with, which reviews sort of the details of what's both like the planning process for the Innovation Fund, and then some of the details, like so sort of how this grant is really aligned to the strategic plan and the budget impacts, which I know we've all discussed significantly over the past year or two in particular, in terms of how the Innovation Fund ties to the larger plan and the budget impacts of it. So I went through that document and I highlighted a couple of sections in there that I just wanted the committee to be aware of. So in particular, just these are in the budget impacts. And so the first one, the memory fellow, there is not really a long-term budget impact because it's essentially a 1 year set aside to develop a project, but then it ends and the curriculum is basically then ready for other teachers to use. But the Heritage Spanish speaking pathway has a highlight there because there is, if you don't mind scrolling down, Betsy, thank you. Just that the staffing model for this is it's sort of a shared, it's not really shared, but it's like an English teacher who's supporting the Spanish teacher in developing the literature programming. And so just noting that everyone is aware that there will be teacher reduction to return to a sort of one teacher per class model in the long term. Betsy, there's background noise for you. I don't know if you want to go on mute. And then do you mind going down a little bit more, Betsy? Thanks. So there is for the Queer Student Program, there is also a question of supporting the leadership and the budgetary capacity. So I think that is not necessarily a question for this year, but it's in the future. And this is a similar question to what happened this year as we were talking about the AAPI affinity program that had been piloted through the Innovation Fund and the transition of that into the high school budget. Data science, there is potentially a budget impact. It says it's going to evolve into a co-taught class. And then I think those were the only highlights of things that I sort of wanted to point out to people that did have budgetary impacts. But I see, Sarah, your hand is up, so go ahead.
Yeah, I think pretty consistently we hear from Anthony when these positions get put in, or when a new class comes in with a FTE associated with it, it's usually because a former class is going to, maybe it's not as relevant anymore, is not going to run. So I appreciate that you've highlighted these, but I also want to say that I think that both the Innovation Fund and Anthony are always thinking that way. So there isn't over the years an impact at the rollout.
I don't think that's entirely true. Wait 1 second, Helen, because affinity programs are not like classes. So the affinity programs, there can be more of them that diversify, and it's not like we drop a different affinity program because we have a new affinity program. I do agree with you, the classes. And then
I agree in that instance, yeah.
Yeah, and then for the courses, if you're going from a course taught by a single teacher into a co-taught model, there's also a budgetary impact there. So so that's why I highlighted those. Yes, I hear what you're saying.
Yep.
And there are instances here which are particularly flagging of the budgetary impact.
Yeah, and I agree completely that that is what we need to sort of be attuned to here. So I appreciate what you're bringing out. That's really like our part in it as a school committee. So thank you.
Helen?
Yeah, I do think we need to keep, as you said, Mariah, we need to keep our eyes on it. They do go down to one teacher in almost every instance. I think it's happened, but I think the data science one gives me a little pause. I don't even remember this one coming to curriculum, but maybe it did.
I think we've gotten presentations on it in the past year. I'm pretty sure it has gone to curriculum because
Okay, I may
we
have
saw,
missed that meeting. I may have missed
yeah,
that
I
meeting.
think
That's
there was
okay.
because we definitely had a presentation on data science for social justice at full school committee.
Okay.
Yeah. Sarah, go ahead.
So I'm going to make sure that we're hearing about this up front in the future as we plan. So I'm the liaison to the Innovation Fund, and I've already started meeting with them. But I'll make sure that I update us during the regular school committee meetings, and then hopefully take advantage of subcommittee meetings for curriculum to kind of go more in depth with classes, so that we can really be watching this. But I do think that the impact of the rollout after the class is done is, not adding many additional positions.
Yeah, I just think like last year, remember it came up because we had the confluence of graders class sizes at the high school. And then I can't remember if it was less than 1 FTE, but it was maybe 0.4, 0.6 cumulatively that was coming from multiple programs. And so just every bit helps. And to the extent that, I mean, the Innovation Fund is amazing and they're doing this amazing stuff for the high school educators to be able to give them these opportunities to innovate. And we want all of that to happen. And we want to make sure that it's sustainable and programs can be picked up.
Completely understood. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So do we want to make a motion to approve? Or to recommend to full school committee that they accept the grant?
So moved.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Yep. Second.
Carolyn, thank you. Sarah, how do you vote?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Yes.
Val?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay. Next item on the agenda is review of PSB, the finance section of the PSB policy manual. I'm wondering if we want to swap this and just pause this for 1 minute and move up the conversation around class sectioning, since we have some attendees who I think are interested in that, and that way they don't have to stay through the entire discussion of finance policy. Is that okay with you, Susan, that we swap around the order and do class, thank you, and class sectioning and update first? So just to remind people that we had told the Hayes community that we would provide them an update in July and an update to the school committee as well on the situation or the status of the rising third grade next year's third grade sections and enrollment.
Yes, so before you is some historical information that I had previously provided to you in March, and then at the meeting at the beginning of June, and now what the numbers are looking like as of yesterday. So I'm just going to focus in on grade 3. If you look back in, Betsy, if you could go the other direction, I'm just going to point out grade 3. So we had 48 registered students in grade 3 back in March. That number declined in May by 1. And
those are the current second graders, just right? Like
the
when we
current
say that, right, grade 3, we were sort of projecting for next year, just so I'm
Grade
clear in
3.
my own head. Okay.
next year's grade 3, grade 2 last year is concluded. So this is, yes, this is as of today, as we take a look towards September. So in July, again, the numbers change, of course, some up, some down. In grade 3, we're down to 46 with 2 sections that would make the average class size 23. We also are aware of 2 additional students that will be moving out of that grade. And so right now, though they have not submitted the paperwork for it, the principal was notified. And that would appear in the next iteration. So those numbers in the 3rd grade are declining. So that's good news, I guess, for those that may be concerned about the class size there. With those 2 out, of course, it would bring the class size down to 22. Overall at Hayes, the average class size is 18, which is very favorable. And so those are the highlights. You know that I present what the guideline is in each grade, and then underneath that, if we collapsed it by 1 section, what would the average class size be? So in the 4th grade, we added section there. So the average class size is down to 16. If we reduce that by 1, I'm not saying we are, I'm just explaining how the table, what the information on the table means. That if we reduce grade 4 and 5 at the Hayes School by 1 section, they would still be within guideline. I'm not saying that we would do that. The numbers will change. This is July, and as you can see, if you look at each of these iterations, the numbers are in flux, and they will continue to be. So we're not recommending any changes in sections any further than what we've already added there at Hayes. Any questions about that? Not, I'll go on to the Baker.
No, I just want to give the chance to our attendees who are here. If they would like to make any public comment, they are welcome to make comment. So I think, Betsy, they just raised their hands if they want to.
Let me just be sure they have that ability. Give me 1 moment here, and
Okay. Carolyn, why don't you go ahead and make
our
your comment?
attendees now can raise their hand for
Okay.
whenever you're ready.
Okay, so we'll let Carolyn go ahead and talk, and anyone, if you're interested in making public comment on this, you're welcome to just put up your hand and I'll call on you after Carolyn.
Thanks, Mariah, and thank you, Susan. I just want to make sure I understand exactly. Sorry, I'm trying to bring this back up on my own screen. So this is the information of enrolled from the district office, not from the, where does this data come from? From the district or from ASA? Which is probably the same thing, but I'm just curious.
The information in this worksheet comes from the Department of Enrollment and Registration.
Okay. And then how does RISE fit into this? Is RISE a separate classroom and it has some inclusion during the day? How does the RISE program fit into these numbers?
Do you,
all the
Want one of us to answer that? Sorry,
I'm
Susan.
gonna
if you
let
don't-
Susan go. Susan, go
Okay.
ahead unless you want some.
Sure, sure. So in terms of the numbers, the students who are attending each school are included within the numbers, the enrollment numbers. It's out of district students that wouldn't be included in the numbers. How the various programs work and how many students, I couldn't speak to that.
Okay, so these numbers are inclusive of the RISE program. It's not a whole separate.
Yeah, whatever students are enrolled
Perfect.
right now at the Hayes School are represented here.
Thank you.
Thanks. It looks like we have no questions from the attendees. So I want to say thank you, Susan, for the update on Hayes. And I think, like you said, you have another update on Baker. So we'll proceed with the Baker update.
Mariah, someone did just raise their hand
Oh.
in attendees, just this.
Okay,
I
great.
will-
If you want to call on, is it Dahlia?
Dahlia, we should be able to hear you now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dahlia. So Yali is my oldest daughter is going to be in 3rd grade, and our youngest daughter, Romy, is starting BEEP. So we are fully integrated in Hayes. My main concern, and I know that there's fluctuation in the numbers and there's changes. We know that last year did not work well for the 3rd grade kids. We heard, and I personally heard from a very close friend, that her kids suffered. Why are we doing an experiment? I understand that maybe we're not as high of a number right now, but the kids are suffering and the teachers are not able to handle this large number of kids. Maybe they're not trained, not capable. It's really challenging for them. I just feel like at the end of the day, it's only our kids that are going to be impacted by it. We have already 3 classes in 2nd grade. I think we need to continue with 3 classes, maybe evaluate for the future, but what we have, why remove from what we have now? So we've been emailing quite a bit. We've been involved, and it's really important to us. You know, we chose Hayes for a reason. We love the school, and we really ask that you reconsider. It's really challenging and to understand why, and I know there's guidelines, but again, the 3rd grade will be the largest class at Hayes. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Carolyn, is this about Hayes? Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, and this might not be super relevant, but I am wondering, Susan, and I'm wondering this just generally, whether you know from the information that you got where you're saying that this is showing 46 in this 3rd grade, and you've been told, I think you said by ASA, that 2 students are leaving. We are asked as parents to enter information into Aspen about our intentions for the next school year. Do you know whether these are families that are choosing to go to private school instead of staying in PSB versus moving out of state, moving out of the country, et cetera, moving out of the town?
My understanding is their moves, not moving out of the community. That's my understanding.
Sorry, I didn't understand what you mean. Their moves, not moving out of the community?
Their meaning moving out of the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Susan, go ahead to the Baker update.
Okay, so Baker's a different situation. It's not enrollment related, rather it is certification related. So at the middle school level, there are 2.5 FTE in social studies and 2.5 FTE in English language arts. And so the 0.5 position is is currently being filled by a person with a certification in ELA and not in social studies. So the administration is going to be adding one FTE in order to be able to have a full-time certified ELA teacher and a full-time certified social studies teacher at the Baker School. I don't have information about where is the reduction going to be, simply because I'm just returning today, and the superintendent and the deputy superintendent of teaching and learning are not in the office this week, and I'm just looking at these numbers, just pulling them together. And I haven't had a chance to discuss with them where the reduction would be. So I'll have to bring that back to you, but there will be more information to follow about where the funding will come from. And then in the future, one of the things that's on my task list is to codify the process for when we make these requests to add a position and where the funding is going to come from. I just, due to my absence, I just haven't had the opportunity to pull that together. So I'll bring that to you at the next meeting once I have the opportunity to solidify the process and the forms and all of that.
Thank you, Susan. I think that'll be great. So we'll pilot that at probably I think we have 2 August meetings, so probably the last one in August to give like a full month to plenty of time to figure out the paperwork and the process, and then so that'll be the first time we go through with the staffing. I don't know what we're going to call this, but the staffing change, whatever whatever it's called when we pilot it next month. So okay, that's helpful. Any questions or comments from the subcommittee about the update to Baker staffing before we proceed? Okay. Next item on the agenda, and thank you, Susan, for the update on Hayes and Baker. Next item on the agenda is the finance policy update. So just as a little bit of history, in 2022, we went through and started this process and I had put together a draft that essentially took the MASC draft policy at the time and Brooklineized it, and we got pretty far into that process, and I would say it was like pretty close to being done. And then we had a turnover in the deputy superintendent position, and so we paused it. And I was really excited to do it in 2022 because that was the 40th anniversary of the bulk of the finance policy, most of which dates from 1982, some a little bit earlier, some a little bit later, but the bulk of it's from 1982. So, so I thought it was going to be a really nice 40th anniversary present to ourselves to update that, but we paused it due to the turnover. And now Susan is here and we are thrilled to have her. And we are not going to rush through this process. We have 3 meetings scheduled this summer to talk about this. And I thought that the first meeting, I had sent out to you all the MASC, basically their draft policy, and then our current finance policy. And the question that I posed to the subcommittee and staff who are participating, and anyone else who's here, everyone's welcome to participate, but specifically it went to my questions that went to the school committee and finance staff were what's missing from the MASC that that we want to add in from our current policies, and then what's in neither place but we think should be there. My intention is to adopt the spirit of what Stephen said, that the MASC policy guru / advisor, I don't know what their title is, director, said, which is less is more. So to the extent that our policy can be relatively streamlined and we leave the details to policy under the direction of Susan and Linus and other staff, then that's probably the best way to go. With that said, there's some areas clearly that the MASC policy both like it asks you to fill in local specifics, and there may be things that we care about and want to talk about, and we just want to plug those in. So so I guess I just want to open it up for conversation. I know not everyone had the chance to read the MASC policy and the PSB policy, but I just sort of want to start by opening up for conversation on the questions that I threw out there of what's missing that we have and what's missing that is not present in either document. And I see your hand is up, Sarah. The thing that I would ask from the subcommittee is comments you make of sort of suggestions. If you can write them down and then send them to me afterwards, just so I know we have this meeting recorded too, but if you, to the extent you can write them down and just email them to me afterwards, that will be helpful to assembling the next draft. So go ahead, Sarah. You're on mute. You're still on mute.
Oh, it's funny. Am I still now?
No, you're good now.
Okay. So what I really like about this document is when it brings out the way that we think about education and how, of course, that's relevant to how we finance things. So the thing that jumped out to me most was that we have started to use different language about equity. The MASC draft has like centering equity and ideas of like greatest educational returns. And I wanted to ask the committee if we are going for MTSS, and that's sort of like what like our goal is this next year is to really address this, if we might want to change our language to reflect that. So instead of saying like centering equity, which is fine language, saying things like for all students, or also referring to how we want our education to be responsive to students. So if you're assessing frequently and then tailoring what you're doing to the student needs. So I proposed, and I put this in writing to Mariah, that we might want to have something more like each and every student be invited, welcomed, and given a sense of belonging in a system of teaching and learning that is fluid, responsive, and dynamic, and that uses all available resources matched to each student's need. So I think that I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of us to give us exact language, but I was wondering if anybody felt like they wanted to update the way that we talk about equity in this document.
Do you mean this document being our policy or
The MASC one.
Okay.
So like I can give you the page number. So
Yeah, I'm wondering where you are.
I think that's the very first page.
I was looking at the first.
Yeah. One of the things your comment, hang on one second, then one of the things your comment made me think of was rather than recreating language, we can point towards our strategic plan, which has a lot of this already articulated, but it is good to anchor finance in
what we want to do.
Exactly, and what we want to do.
Yeah.
So how, to the extent we can tie those things together, I think that's powerful.
So I'll go back to the strategic plan and find where we've talked about equity there and bring out some language for us, and then I'll write that to you in an email. Does that work?
Yeah, that works. Thank you.
Okay.
Helen, were you talking before?
Yes, I was. Just
Okay.
a quick question. I only see our policy in where is the MASC policy to look at it?
You got it in your email yesterday, and I think Betsy said she had trouble linking it to the agenda
I got
online.
it.
Yeah,
Okay,
so it
I'll
should be
look.
on our materials page.
Okay.
If you look on the materials page, yeah. Carolyn, and then Susan, if you're willing, I would love if you would talk to us about the philosophy of finance policy as well, sort of what you think it's useful for. How does it help you in general, and what are some really good things you've seen? But Carolyn, go ahead.
Thanks. So first, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Are you suggesting, Mariah, that so I did read through the whole mask, and then I started reading through the PSB existing policy. Are you suggesting that we now And I agree with the less is more. And already just looking at the PSB, it was like a lot more.
Yeah.
So Mariah, are you suggesting that we, in this process now, just begin with use the mask as a template and almost put aside? Okay,
Yes.
great.
Basically, I'm thinking, right, like let's start with MASC.
Okay, fine.
And then as we read through the finance one, and we don't have to do this in the minute now, but as if we think like, and I did read through it and I'll show you all some of my comments, but the things that I think we should sort of pull over into our next draft, because I think they're important. And I flagged a couple things that I don't want to see come over, and we can talk about why too. So, but yes, I was thinking, let's start with the thing that we know is legally accurate.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and ties to all the different state regulations and such, and then just fill in from there a little bit.
Great. And so with that understanding, I'd love to comment, sort of piggybacking from where Sarah was. So it did jump out to me, and I liked that the mask document is centered on educational goals and uses that term frequently. I like the use of educational returns. There are other things that I liked that I don't know if they're in ours. I'll look later in a later comment about community values being reflected. When I read the first page and the mask document says, 1, allocate public funding centering equity while achieving the greatest educational returns. To be honest, what that makes me think is, what does equity mean here? I think that that's a word that at this point is so ubiquitous to have, to some extent, become unclear as to what it means. So if anything, if any addition in that respect, I think I would be looking for a refinement or a clearer definition of what that means. And while still sticking with the less is more, and I think I would probably, yeah, I think keeping it at that sort of high level in terms of meeting student needs, providing what students need, education, what we get for the dollars that we're spending, that kind of works for me, less so than getting into specifics of programming or approaches that may sort of come and go. So that's a couple comments. I'll have more.
That's helpful. Sarah, go ahead.
When you were talking about what to leave out, on page 13, it talks about purchase orders.
13 of MASC, you mean?
Yes,
Okay.
of MASC.
Yeah.
Are purchase orders the only way that we can buy supplies at this point?
No.
Is that right? So that definitely goes into the category of leaving out.
Why would
It's
we,
just a simple
can you
thing.
pull it up? I think it's one more. Yeah. What's the, well, then I don't think we want to exclude that, or we might want to, right? Well, I don't know, because when we have, Susan, when we buy stuff from Amazon or whatever, when people are putting stuff on credit cards, is there always an associated PO with it? Well, then there you go.
Oh, there is.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
All
Okay.
right. And then I just wanted to make sure, sorry if I can speak again to another issue without raising my hands. I just want to make sure that we all are aware that Dr. Guillory talked to us about over the December break. It would be great not to have our senior leadership working hard to meet goals for, right after break. And so I thought that that came up in our version when you're looking at page 13 of section D of our version. And it says at that point that when the school committee needs to get the information about what's no longer necessary and that should come in on January 1st. That might be a date for us to change, I was thinking, to later. Do you follow what I
Yeah.
mean?
I do. And I have notes on this too, which is essentially this is an opportunity for us to rationalize whatever the calendar is, so that to sort of continue the conversation that we had earlier this year about what are the dates that we want to live by. And I think that there is a section in the MASC one where Betsy, can you go to like page 2? I think it is. It's like right in the beginning. Yeah, that one. And it starts to talk about deadlines and so forth, and it highlights, it says it, you know, basically we need to make sure that we're following along. It talks about the statutory requirement of the public hearing, but we need to sort of come up with something. And it says the calendar year will be determined by calculating backwards from the final adoption date. Essentially, we need to modify this a little bit, and I think that it also gives us the opportunity to talk about defining a calendar every year. If we want to formalize that we're going to have guidelines, which is in our current one, we should put that in there too. So that's an opportunity to personalize this.
And when you're thinking less is more, what are you thinking? Do you think that it's better to say that there will be a calendar and at the policy level not have actual dates? Or do you think that we need to have the actual dates?
I don't know yet. Maybe this is a chance, Susan, if you're willing at this point, I might put you on pause just for 1 second, Helen. And Susan, I don't know if you got the chance to read through this at all. I know you had a lot going on, but I was wondering if you are willing to talk to us about sort of what is useful from a finance perspective in policies, maybe the tension between, it's not always a tension, I guess, between like what's articulated versus the flexibility you have, so on and so forth. Just a little bit as we start to think about this. You're on mute.
Yes, you're right, Mariah. This has not been on my radar. Coming back, you know, I had a pretty full agenda of things to do, so I have not had the opportunity to read either document, but will do so and be able to offer some of my thoughts at the upcoming meeting. I prefer to just kind of listen to what's on people's mind tonight, and then I can, as opposed to taking a deeper dive or talking through any one particular one, I'd really just prefer to listen to what people said tonight, and then be able to really engage at the next meeting. If
Sounds good. That's perfect. Yeah, I just didn't want to not give you room to chime in as you might feel fit.
Mariah, I can't
yeah.
see hands. Do you mind if I just make a comment on calendar, whether we do it more specifically or not? We do need to think about the fact that we have more layers of review, I think, in Brookline than many other cities and towns. So I think we need to just make sure that we're accounting for all that whenever we work backward from a town meeting vote.
Sounds good. Thank you. Helen and then Sarah.
Two pieces. One, I think, and I'm not sure, but I think there's a town bylaw that we need to have a budget presentation and the top line by February 15th. I may be wrong, but I would like us to check that, because that's the date that always stuck in my mind and always felt way too early. Along with that, I think, Mariah, correct me if I'm wrong, but at the Town School Partnership, they were talking about trying to work on these dates. Is that correct?
I missed the last Town School Partnership meeting. I can't remember what I had, but I had a conflict, or I was traveling or something.
Cliff remembers.
Cliff has his hand up. But one thing I would just say is that Town Council has opined that the town bylaw relating to dates doesn't actually apply to PSB, and not that we don't want to be cooperative and collaborative, but the bylaw. But I mean, to the extent that we still want to be you know, all rowing in the same direction, but that
Yeah,
the
of course.
bylaw itself doesn't necessarily
course.
apply.
Of course.
Cliff,
But I mean, it does, so the February 15th isn't in stone, etched in stone.
according to town council, right?
Okay.
Go ahead, Cliff.
Yeah, I'll make a couple comments. I think first, you know, town council has made a lot of statements over the past 6 months about a variety of matters that he's kind of gone back and forth on. And so, you know, before everyone sort of gloms on to what Mariah just said, I think it's really worthwhile to go back and see if he still feels quite the way that he did earlier this year. But having said that, you know, I do think there were conversations at the town school partnership about stretching things out. And I think to the extent that that's going to happen, it would be in everyone's interest to have some sort of modification to the bylaw so that town meeting members and others in town government and residents don't look at the laws and start saying, well, why aren't things happening the way they're supposed to? And that is, you know, there's plenty of time to get something, you know, ready by the end of the summer for the fall. Right. And I would suggest that maybe some time be spent on trying to craft something there.
Thank you, Cliff.
If I may jump in.
Dennis. Yeah.
Thank you, Cliff, for sharing that, and Helen for taking me back, because I was trying to remember which meeting that had come up. And I think to Sarah's big point about timelines, as well as Val saying, you know, let's sort of count back from town meeting and know what the deadlines are. What I think I was hearing at the last town school partnership was this notion of the February 15th date. And I think what we were doing on the school side was adding some heavy stressors to ourselves to try to have a final budget by that date, or voted or adopted budget by the committee by that date. But what I understood, and I think it was Melissa that said it, was this notion of you should have your budget submitted to the administrator by that date, or your preliminary budget by that date. And we were trying to do a lot of the work in January, which didn't give us time, number one, to even understand fully what our assessment was from the town school partnership. So we were doing a lot of work, what I called in two different gopher holes from the town and the schools in that regard. So I think it's really worthwhile in exploring the timeline for this year to say, what is it that makes sense? And when we had this conversation with the administrator and deputy administrator, Susan and I, about timelines, we just asked the historical question, well, in the past, when did PSB submit its budget or produce its budget book? And it was always around this notion of around the February break came up. So we have certainly accelerated that, which has made it much more difficult on the school side to produce the documents in a way. We're producing quality, but we'd like time to be able to interpret and work through those rather than pushing or advancing forward to this February date, given some of the initial things that we had put in place before then. So
yeah, I would just add one or two things. I think that to the extent that the town administrator expects some sort of preliminary information on the 15th, that you can anticipate that everyone else in town, and certainly on the advisory committee, would expect to have the information at that point in time as well. And as long as that is something that the PSB is comfortable with, then that's fine. And I do know that you guys pushed to get something out earlier this year than you wanted to. I just think that there needs to be an understanding and agreement among the parties, certainly at the town school partnership, about the timing issues, and to the extent that there needs to be any clarification or modification to the bylaw, then that's something that should be done.
I'm going to just make one comment on this and then I'll call you on you, Sarah. I think one opportunity is something that we've talked a little bit about, because there is a difference between having a budget that Susan has in Excel, for example, and a print-ready budget book, and with all of the accompanying justification, backup, and other details. And I think that there's an opportunity possibly to be doing a lot of that back-end calculation work and accompanied by a brief memo possibly for February 15th, and then giving an extended deadline or something like that for the actual book itself. So that, but this is something we can look at our next meeting of what does seem like a reasonable schedule and what are the deliverables. Because if one person is thinking of a budget as a bottom line number and someone else is thinking of it as a 150-page document, those are very different things. And so if we clarify our terms a bit, it might be really helpful to both alleviate staff, and it might mean changing dates too, but just there's different things that can, when we say the word budget, that we have the opportunity to relieve some of that stress, while also providing some level of meaningful information on earlier dates. Sarah, go ahead.
I want to ask a little bit about our assumptions here. So I assume that we're working off of the town date for town meeting being in May for budget approval. And is that why February 15th came up, was to give enough time to work up to town meeting? That's one question I have. And then the other thing that I want to make sure that doesn't get lost in this is we keep on saying, and so all of us know, that we have to have our budget approved before we can go out and hire for new positions. And that May town meeting date is difficult for us because it puts us a little bit behind where other schools, so that we're not able to hire the best people early on. So
I don't believe that, because there's like, how many towns in the Commonwealth that go through town meeting? And I think this is like a manufactured Brookline crisis, frankly. So I'm not saying we need to sort that question out right now, but in a future meeting, I think when we talk about the details of the calendar, we can get into that, because I don't think that that's real.
Okay, and then
or somehow everyone else is working around it. And I do think it's an issue when we have a budget that's well in excess. There might be some challenges there, but I'm still not sure that that's true. I feel like other people have figured this out, and we can figure this out too.
The part that you're not sure is true is that we have to have the budget approved before we can hire?
Correct. Okay. Somehow everyone else is working within the town meeting cycle and managing to hire people. So,
and then the other question, is it from February, that is the reason why we have that February 15th date, is that's as much time as we need prior to a town meeting in May? Is that where that comes from?
Well, I think that there's different things on it because advisory has some cycle. I don't necessarily want to dwell on all the details of calendars. So if everyone's hands are up on the details of calendars, let's just, like, the point of this meeting is just to flag the things that we want to put into the next draft. And so we don't have to probe every nook and cranny of the calendar question today. Helen, you have a different topic to talk about?
It's just a point of information. Not everybody has their town meeting in May.
There you go.
So
another intrigue.
Some have, Lexington knows their budget in November. How they do it, I have no idea, but.
Okay. Susan, go ahead.
May is a very common time to have a town meeting in my experience, for towns. So I don't see that as being something that should create a hardship for us. And again, I can talk more about budget process and protocols at an upcoming meeting. This is good because if needs to be a lot of dialogue around this particular topic, I think it's well worth the time spent to dig in and really have meaningful conversation on each policy if possible, so that we get to the right place for Brookline today and into the future.
Thanks, Susan. If people are willing, I would pull up my document that I went through and sort of flagged the stuff that I was interested in retaining. Let me see if I can get it to come up. Okay. So I called it things in our policy I would like to see retained, and my computer's getting angry about scrolling. There's a couple of things that are in red which are not in our current policy, but we have discussed them, so I included them here too. So the first area is what we've just been talking a lot about the Brookline specific timeline for the budget and deliverables and what those are and when it's published and blah, 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 all of these kinds of topics. The next area is when changes are made to the financial plan. So we publish the budget and then something needs to change, and what are, like, do we want to talk about the details? So this red one, the approval for any new positions, that's what we were just talking about right before this session of how we work that into the process so that there's a process for that approval. And then the next one is notification. This is in the current bylaw, is basically notification of any changes. I think it says like any transfers across cost centers is what it says now. And so that's something of like, you know, I think it would make sense for us to include that, but we might want to consider it. The policy that we have now doesn't talk about any threshold, I believe, for those approvals. And so we might want to say we don't need to know below X amount. I don't know. And then our current policy also talks about having monthly during the school year budget reports by cost center, and then quarterly by operating budget, and then by the other accounts. So the quarterly is what we do now, and and then do we want to consider these monthly budget reports? I have this feeling of tension in my mind between like so much reporting taking away from the other time that staff needs to do things. And so this balance, but on the other hand, it is interesting to be able to see things by cost center, which our current reports don't. So this is just something that I was mulling on, of being interested in seeing cost by cost center. Grants and gifts, right now it says that they must be brought to, no, actually this is a hybrid right here. No, it doesn't. It's not a hybrid. It says that grants are supposed to be brought to the committee before they're submitted, which should happen and doesn't happen right now. And then they're supposed to get reapproved, or I guess approved before expenditure, and that's true for grants and for gifts. So I would like us to, and Susan and I have talked about this too, have a better process around grants so that they're not submitted before they at least are. It doesn't necessarily have to be the full grant, but some sort of intention to submit with the key details is brought to the committee. And then there's some nice language that we have now. It's a little wordy, but it is helpful, talking about the relationship with PTOs, sort of equity around PTO spending, what kinds of things PTOs should spend money on and what things should be paid for by the district, which I thought was really helpful. To sort of clarify that relationship, because PTOs are so present in Brookline schools, and really we want to make sure that everyone's on the same page about what they should be funding, how their funding is approved by the school committee and so forth, because those are still gifts to the schools. Although often they are directly funded by the PTOs and they aren't even presented as gifts to us. So how we should be handling that. And then the other thing is, and we've talked about this, is this idea of how to, what are the third-party platforms? Should we be asking people to or discouraging those? Like when staff are sending up GoFundMe's for different things, should we be really collecting the money through PSB and not having it? To me, there's a big risk about an individual collecting money on behalf of a school district. It puts them at risk. It puts the school district. There's just a whole bunch of concerns I have about that. And so how we protect our staff, protect our families and our students and their caregivers, and make sure that the flow of money in support of the schools is very clear. So that's one thing I thought about. And then signatories, right now our documents designate the finance chair and the capital chair for their specific warrants, and that's not written, I don't think, in the MASC documents, or maybe it's presented a little bit differently, that like the whole school committee has to vote on it. And I just thought it was more simple if we just designated it. Then there's these miscellaneous things. Our documents say that like contracts over $100,000 are supposed to go to school committee for approval. You know, is that something we want to consider? We right now have a petty cash policy and a cash in school buildings policy. Those aren't represented in MASC. I don't even know if our schools have petty cash anymore, but certainly cash in school buildings is happening. People collect money for field trips. And again, that's another risk, just like the GoFundMe platforms, whenever someone is handling money on a one-to-one basis.
And you noticed that those numbers were really low, right? For petty cash?
For petty cash, they were, but also, again, I don't know if petty cash is happening, and this is something we can talk about separately, of course, Susan, but it just made me think, like, should we retain this policy, or is this something that should really be a procedure and it shouldn't be a policy? But some of this stuff is important and I want to make sure. So these are things we can put aside. There was something about credit cards in our policies about who, I think about just using them in general. I thought, should we have something about who can have procurement cards and why? There's a section about sales calls, basically, and who is allowed to access the school. That might be less relevant now with our current way we do things, but maybe not. There is a section that we have now about student activity accounts and the balances that should be retained in them. And maybe that should be updated, and maybe it needs to be included, maybe it doesn't. And then there's really interesting things. I don't know why they ended up in finance, except that maybe they were more expensive at the time. But basically, like this idea of environmentally friendly cleaning products and using those, and then like using buying Energy Star equipment. So I don't think those necessarily need to be there, but I don't even know if we need policies about that at all these days. That might have been more controversial when it was set up, but I'm not sure it's a thing. But if it does need to be retained, it probably shouldn't be in finance at this point. So those were sort of things I sort of wanted to flag of, I thought that they might want to go somewhere, but we should talk about them. There is a whole section on scholarships. I would like to propose that PSB gets out of the business of scholarships. This is scholarships for college attendance, and the high school has a significant number of scholarships that are awarded, and the high school and BEF also gives out scholarships. And I'm sorry, BCF, thank you. BCF gives out scholarships. And there are people from the high school sitting on the BCF scholarship committee and people from BCF sitting on the high school scholarship committee. And I just don't see that our role is as a public school district is to administer scholarships. I think that that's a very worthy thing, but I think it's a distraction from the core work of the district. So that's my proposal, is that we gradually transfer the scholarships to BCF, who I believe would be willing to steward them. And then the last thing is there is a financial assistance policy, which I believe is in the student section of the handbook. And I thought this is an opportunity for us to possibly move it to finance and refresh it, tied to all these other financial things. So these were some of the things on my mind as I went through Brookline specific things that we might want to roll into the MASC policy. Helen, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I had two comments. If you could go up a bit.
Yes.
On here. I just wanted to clarify. Oh no, he went through so many things.
Sorry.
Oh, the notification of changes across cost centers.
Yes.
There isn't a policy. There certainly was a practice for many years when Peter Rowe was here to flag if we moved more than $5,000 from one, and there were like A through G categories, personnel being one, a whole bunch of categories. If we were to move any money, that was there. So it was a practice. It
is in the policy. That's why it's black, because it's in the current policy.
Oh, okay. But
yes.
I don't think we've been informed of it, or that it's been used recently.
Right.
So that's that. With regards to scholarships, I have somewhat of a problem because BCF, I know, needs money to do their stuff, but they take money out of the scholarship fund. people give scholarships to us, to the town, to the school committee. So I would be very hesitant to move scholarships out of our purview and the town's purview.
I am not sure that that's true.
They do. I'm telling you.
That they take an administrative fee off of it?
Yep.
Okay. Well,
Yep.
we can look into it, but yeah, that was just my initial thought on it. Carolyn, go ahead.
Oh, and the one other piece, I'm sorry, Carolyn, if I could just finish the thought.
No, sure. It just was a question about.
Yeah, the one other piece about scholarships, the staff at the high school knows the students and families better than anybody else. And so they are better positioned to help to know which students really need the scholarships or which ones fit into certain categories.
But the staff sit on the BCF scholarship committee too.
Yeah, because they have other scholarships. Because
right, but my point is, even if the scholarships transferred to BCF, it's not that the high school staff wouldn't be there to inform who is the best fit for what.
I still think it's something we need to do, but okay.
Any other questions or anything on my?
I interrupted Carolyn.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Where did Carolyn go? Oh, there she is.
No, I interrupted you, Helen, but I think that was just clarified for me. I was just asking a sort of learning question about the different that the high school does. The high school does scholarships, and that's completely separate from BCF. It sounds like, okay. And does BCF, I feel like I heard something about something once, and I don't remember what it was, but that it might have had more to do with park and rec or recreation activities, but that sometimes money goes from the town, and I don't know if this is the case also with the schools, to the BCF, and then the BCF administers that money. So does that happen? Does the school department give money to the BCF in any way to then allocate or grant or?
To the best.
Are you talking about the scholarship pool specifically?
Well, I am, but also generally. Or is it sounds like you're saying there are different scholarship programs and they're completely separate, but it did raise that question for me.
There are different piles of money. Some of the scholarships come from BCF, both for BEEP and for the college. They have a fund. And then we have the town treasurer keeps money. I'm not sure if we get a report on it. We probably should. Of how much money there is in scholarship funding. There are scholarships that go back 50 years, that have
longer than that, actually.
Maybe.
There are like Pierce Best Boy and Best Girl scholarships from like the 19 teens or something like that. No, I didn't go to Pierce, but I was the Pierce treasurer and we had to fund some of these. So, and that's part of it too, is the BHS ones are not endowed for the most part. They're, what do you call it when they give in the money? Like, Susan, what's that called? No, it's not one time. They essentially have to be refunded like annually. At least some of them are. They're not.
Some of them are endowed. I mean,
maybe some of them are endowed, but yeah, some of them are refilled like annually. So that's another thing where there's a lot of staff time being spent on chasing money. Sarah, go ahead.
I wanted to just go back to the point of the less is more and sort of insist on it a little bit. When we're thinking about putting less into policies, it doesn't necessarily mean that things won't happen, because we can have a level of trust with Susan where we say to her, we really like to see, a monthly report, and she knows that, she does that when she can, but it doesn't have to go into the policy. So I just wanted to kind of like go back to that point again, is that not having something in our policy doesn't mean that we won't get that. We can just sort of like take off some of the things that are practices that we all sort of agree on.
I agree with that. And I think that there's an expectation of like continuity, and one day it won't be Susan and it won't be any of us. And what are we trying to retain over time? So to the extent policies guide then that's I think, what we want to make sure we're articulating. Carolyn.
So I'm trying to toggle back and forth between the Zoom screen and the document and highlight it a bit. There were a few places where the mask policy talks about transparency and information available, not just to the school committee, but also to the public. And I'm interested in that always. And I think the public is interested in that. And I say that with, again, I'll say it until it's annoying, full appreciation for Susan and Diane and everything they are doing and all the improvements in that respect. But I do think that it behooves all of us and the system generally, that the more information that the public can easily access, the better. And so although I do think less is more, and I only skimmed through this, I might be interested in sort of whether there are places where there may be a couple additions or even examples of like when we say transparency, presentations and documents associated, I think this is on the second page, with the budget, sort of like what that means, what the expectation there is. That's something I'd be interested in discussing and hearing others' thoughts on. And there was something, Mariah, that you said that made me think of this, which I think had to do with the cost center transfers. Like I think you said, or there was something where you were saying it can be interesting for school committee to see. And in my mind, I'm thinking, and for the public, right? Like we want to.
Absolutely.
So
Right.
anytime that anything where there's opportunities to be specific about information availability, detailed information, I think that's really helpful for the system.
Thanks. So at this point, unless people have additional comments, I think what we can do is probably wrap up for today. Take the time, if you haven't already, to look through the documents, take a slow read on the MASC one, a slower read on the PSB one, and just see if there's other things in PSB you want to retain. And again, that was my first question. The second question was, what's not present in either that you think should be? And if you can feed that information back in the next week or so, that would be helpful. Our next meeting is, I think, is it August 7th? Yeah.
Yes, that's right, August 7th.
Okay, so that's 3 weeks from now. So hopefully it would be great if people can give sort of feedback in the next week or so, and then that gives me some time to connect with Susan and sit down and talk about some of these questions and issues, and then we can come back to you all on August 7th with some sort of a draft for feedback. Does that sound like a reasonable timeline? Susan, does that sound okay to you as well? In a couple of weeks coming back to this?
I think what would be really helpful is if we prioritize the ones that perhaps are most important, and then focus our attention on doing them in batches.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Because it sounds to me, having listened to the dialogue tonight, that people are interested in going maybe a little deeper if we do it in that way. For we can provide some examples of what complementary documents might look like for financial reports and things, so that we can craft a policy, and then the procedure can dovetail that. So you can kind of see what are best practices, why would we recommend it being done in a certain way, without having to feel like we have to cover everything all at once. So sounded to me like the budget calendar was a high priority here tonight. The financial reporting, I would agree with both of those. And let's see how long it takes us to just get through maybe 3 of them. And then some of the other ones are going to take more time because there's a lot more background work that will need to be done, especially around scholarships and things, in order to educate everyone to make informed decisions about what our policy and practices might be. And I would argue that some of those are probably more useful to us because we do have a work plan to kind of get us back on track from a financial perspective, and those policies that dovetail the work we're already doing would be the ones that I would prefer that we spend more time on. And even if
sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Carolyn, go ahead.
My hand is just raised for new business when you get to
okay.
that. Should I go ahead or
go
wait?
for it? No, new business time.
So again, thank you, Susan, for the enrollment and sectioning update you provided on Hayes. I would just love to put in a plug. I don't know what the typical process is for school committee during the summer, but I would love to have an update on enrollment district-wide at the whatever's the typical or appropriate time, or I'd just love to see how all the schools are looking. And I don't know if that comes from Susan or Megan or Mariah, you can tell me. Go buzz off.
I don't know that we usually get a summer update. I think we get like a post-October 1 update usually. This is my recollection, because summer is like people are moving out, people are moving in. Megan's office is like Megan and I think it's mostly Megan. I don't know if Megan has a team right now, right? It's mostly Megan who is doing. Okay, she does have a team. So onboarding, offboarding students. I don't know that there's like, I think the numbers are in flux, and
okay, that makes sense.
that's my impression. I don't know if that's accurate, Susan, that it's be a point in time data at this, like point in time report at this point would probably be very short-lived.
Understood.
Yep.
I'd love to make a second longer term plug. And I mentioned this to Mariah, and it might, I don't know that it's finance. At some point when staff has their head above water, and it probably would be Megan, I really would love to understand a little bit more, or get information about families, students, staying in, leaving PSB for private school, for all the reasons. I think that's important, and I know it's a lot, and there's a lot in there, but I would just like to, I think that's sort of, I'd be interested in seeing kind of the historical, where we are. I think it tells us something about how we're doing, how families perceive how we're doing, and just kind of about the town and who's moving here and why and all of that. So that's just a thought. Oh, here's my husband with my dinner.
Thanks, Carolyn. I don't think that that's a finance one, but I think you can bring it to Andy, and Suzanne is
okay,
and who can take it to docket.
Okay,
see
thank
what
you.
happens. Yeah. Okay, so we'll wrap up 15 minutes early. Thank you, everyone. And again, if you can just provide that feedback, and then we'll make a plan for in 3 weeks to reconvene with hopefully something. And I like what Susan said about focusing on the key bits and leaving a whole bunch of the rest of it to figure out later. I think that's a good way. I really just want to rip off this Band-Aid of a 42-year-old policy at this point and get like a modern policy, and we can fix some of the stuff around the edges as we go. So that sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you,
Talk to you
Susan.
soon.
Thank you, Mariah.
Yep. Thanks, Susan. Bye, everybody. Thank you,
Thanks,
Linus.
bye.